Pnawn da, bawb, a chroeso cynnes i gyfarfod arbennig o Fwrdd Iechyd Prifysgol Betsi Cadwaladr y pnawn yma. Mae braf iawn cael croesawu nid yn unig aelodau o'r bwrdd, ond y cyhoedd a rhai o'r partneriaid hefyd ar gyfer y cyfarfod arbennig yma heddiw. Un eitem sydd gennym ni ar y agenda heddiw, wrth gwrs, sef yr eitem i drafod y gwasanaeth sy'n ymwneud â'r ambulans awyr, ac mae yna lu o bapurau wedi cyflwyno i ni, a bydd yna gyfle i ni wyntyllu rhai o'r materion wrth i ni gynnal cyfarfod. Felly, yr eitem gyntaf dwi am droi ato fo ydy eich croesawu chi, fel dwi wedi gwneud, ac atgoffa aelodau bod rhwyddent i ddefnyddio pa iaith bynnag maen nhw am wneud yn ystod y cyfarfod. Os oes unrhyw un eisiau cyfrannu i'r drafodaeth i godi llawn electronig, os gwelwch yn dda. Yn ymuno â ni heddiw, mae Jeff o Llais, a fydd yna gyfle i Jeff gyfrannu ymhellach ymlaen yn y cyfarfod, felly croeso i Jeff yn y gystal. Dyn ni wedi cael rhai ymddiheuriadau heddiw, sef gan Chris Stockport, Claire Budden, Rhian Watkin-Jones, Billy Nichols, Gareth Evans a Dylan Roberts. Felly mae'r aelodau yna yn ymddiheurio am absenoldeb heddiw. Eitem nesaf, eitem 2, ydy datgan buddiant. So os gan unrhyw un fuddiant yn y trafodaethau heddiw, os gwelwch yn dda. Os nad oes, awn ni ymlaen i'n prif eitem ni, felly sef y dyfodol y gwasanaeth fel oeddwn ni'n cyfwyll yn gynharach. Ac beth i ni am wneud gyda'r eitem yma ydy gofyn i Caroline Prifwythredwr i roi cyflwyniad i ni. Bydd yn sail wedyn i ni gael trafodaeth ac cyfle i holi cwestiynau. Carol, dros ato chi. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr. Prynawn da pawb. Afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much, Chair, for enabling me to say a few words in opening the item this afternoon. I think there may well be a display going up, but in the meantime, I will just cover off a few key areas. I think it's probably quite important for me to say I was personally at the meeting in 2015 where we supported the development of the EMERT service, the Emergency Medical Retrieval and Transfer Service in Wales. And I think that was a really key moment. And this service has helped thousands of people since that time and is highly well regarded, and the partnership between the NHS and the Wales Air Ambulance Service is one that is cherished, not just here in North Wales, but across the rest of Wales. So it's with that sort of context that the background to the discussion we have today relates to some work that was undertaken back in 2022 that started to look at the potential for a development, a change of the service, and that process was agreed at the Emergency Ambulance Services Committee, which is the committee that oversees EMERTs. So that was back in November 22, and the review that took place was to include public engagement, considering the views, the concerns, the appetite, the queries from members of the public and stakeholders, and that was undertaken by the Emergency Ambulance Services Commissioner and his team. Now, if I just briefly remind us what the purpose of the EMERTs review was, because I think this is fundamental in any of our discussions later on. As I referred to the development of this service, certainly back in 2015, my own experience was that the sort of pre-hospital critical care was often undertaken by land, and the development of this air service seen as being able to help more people and save lives, and hence the review held that true in terms of the purpose was to see, can more people be helped with a change and a development of this service? Can resources be utilised better? Can money be spent wisely? And can some of the problems be resolved, in terms of access and flying times, etc. So that was the review of that was the purpose of the EMERTS review. I mentioned engagement just a few moments ago. So the key elements of the review, the thing we were particularly keen on stressing in the ETH committee was the need to engage with people. As I said, a very highly valued service, one that we know changed people's lives, and so that there would certainly be comments and contributions from people in our communities. So back in September 2022, the Emergency Ambulance Services Commissioner approached the then Community Health Council. Good to see Jeff here, because Jeff will have been on the North Wales CHC as well as Llai, so will have seen this from the start. Really looking at how to proceed with engagement. In November, just over a year or so later, after the initial conversations following engagement, there were some concerns raised over the review, and some further steps to engagement agreed. And I recall being at the meeting in December 2023 and into January, where there was a need to be absolutely clear that that engagement was highly valued and placed a particular emphasis in any decision making going forward. So that is the engagement scope and purpose. And the next slide just tells us a little bit more about the process. And just before I go through that, it's important to remind ourselves as a board that we have a duty to enable and ensure engagement and consultation. So that's why we are labouring these points really about engagement. I won't go through the detail of it, but you can see 3 phases of engagement. The first one was 14 weeks, a second one a shorter period, and the final was shorter still, 4 weeks and online. There were more than 1,000 responses, engagement session attendances actually in person, and those are displayed for our communities there, as well as 2,500 views submitted via the different feedback routes. And taking Wales into account as a totality, about 20%, so 1 in 5 of the responses that came through were from people in North Wales. So I'm really pleased that people engaged so thoroughly in this process. The conclusion of the engagement has drawn some real issues that I'd like to flag for us in considering the proposals we have in front of us. So there was particular dissatisfaction and opposition to the close of the air bases in Welshpool and Caernarfon. And that's centred really around the longer response times, reduced coverage and compromised emergency care, particularly in rural and remote areas. People expressed real concerns around that. A criticism about a proposed new location. So just to remind, potential closure of Welshpool and Carnarvon and replacing that with one single base sited in the Rhuddlan type area in North Wales. A strong belief. We've got that through the correspondence that we've had, that there is an impact, a negative impact on rural communities, in particular for our area in Gwynedd and in Ynys Môn. And there was real concern that the unmet need must be provided by the service. So they're striving to meet more unmet need, and I'm sure we're going to come back to that. That engagement report was shared in the EASC meeting, and further consideration was asked by the members of EASC, in particular working with Llais. Now, the important thing about Llais, and Jeff will be able to speak for himself, but Llais is the statutory body that are able to, or whose role actually is to provide the voice of citizens, and that is highly valued by us as a health board in supporting our duties. So Llais, Jeff will be able to make the contribution, but there has been correspondence from Llais, which is in the pack that was distributed for the board meeting today. And I'll let Jeff sort of talk to that. But as you will have read, there have been some concerns raised, which the Emergency Ambulance Services Commissioner has attempted to address. And then finally, to the recommendations themselves, I mentioned the recommendation to close the base at Carnarvon and at Welshpool and replace that with a single base in the centre of North Wales, or Rhuddlan area. I'm not quite sure it's completely geographically the centre, but that's a recommendation for, in light of the strong concerns that have been made, particularly for people who live in highly rural areas, of a perceived loss of service. That recommendation 4 was outlining a proposal for bespoke land service to supplement the air service itself. So Chair, just to sort of draw attention to what happens after our discussion today, because I am the Health Board's member on the successor committee to EASC, now called the Joint Commissioning Committee. And I'm certainly looking for a steer and a mandate from the board to be able to adequately participate in the decision making that is planned to take place on the 23rd of April. And I know I've been involved in this from my previous role and here in North Wales. I know that this has been a very challenging and contentious issue over a service that is highly valued. So I know that we will want to ensure that we're able to fully participate in the discussion and decision making on the 23rd of April. Diolch, Chair, I'll leave it there if I may.
Great, diolch yn iawn, Carol. And it's good that you mentioned the fact that it's that joint committee that, of course, makes a decision regarding the future of the service, and each health board will have a representative on that committee, and you are our representative. So before going into any questions or comments, Jeff from Llais, just perhaps on the back of that engagement, if you've got any further information that brings us right up to date, as it were, regarding any views and any comments that will help us in our discussions.
I can do that, Chair. As Carol has said, the role of Llais in service change is to ensure that the voices of communities and individuals are heard by decision makers, and community health councils had that as a statutory role. The CHC Llais team in North Wales has been involved in these proposals since August 2022, and in September 2022 we had a formal presentation from EMERTS and the ambulance charity at our CHC meeting. At that meeting, CHC members did not support the proposals as they were at that time. We recommended that the change be dealt with in line with NHS guidance on engagement and offered to provide advice and assistance in the delivery and the methodology of that engagement. That offer was accepted at the meeting but was ultimately not taken up. In late 2022, we first engaged with the Carnarvon campaigners, and we have sought to communicate their concerns to EMERTS on a regular basis. I and other Llais staff attended many of the events in the 3 phases over the past 18 months. We found them to be more information-giving exercises than true engagements, and I communicated these concerns to EMERTS colleagues over that period. Our observations about the various phases of the process were set out in a recent letter that was sent to Stephen Harry on 9th of April and copied to all health boards in Wales. Just for clarity, those issues were around the importance of respecting and understanding the strength of feeling within rural communities about the proposals, people's continued concern about the impact of the proposals on rural population. And we must remember that this is a service substantially funded by the charitable donations of people in those rural areas. We said that we believe that further work is needed to develop the proposals for those services in rural and remote areas in order to address the legitimate concerns of residents. We note the proposal to establish a task and finish group to further refine and develop the approach, including more public engagement, and to deliver a detailed implementation plan by the end of September. We believe that no decisions, including in principle decisions, should take place until that work is complete. We note the proposal to endorse further work being undertaken by the Air Ambulance charity to scope an operational basis in line with the findings. And again, we believe that no changes should be made until that work is complete. Given the identified need for this further work and the acknowledgement that no changes will be made until 2026 at the earliest, and will be subject to the implementation of a plan agreed in September, we do not understand the reasons why it is considered necessary at this stage to proceed with a decision that would consolidate EMERTS services currently operating at Welsh School in Carnarvon into a single site in North Wales. And in taking that decision, we can see that health boards have been asked to note the risk to the charity. It's not clear to us what that risk might be in terms of the timing of the decision and how this might impact on people. We are aware of air ambulance services elsewhere in the UK, the Highlands and Islands, in Cornwall and the Scillies, where public confidence has been lost and there have been dire consequences that followed that. Just winding up, I'd like to say that we thank the chair and the chief executive of Betsy Cadwaladr for meeting with the representative of the Carnarvon campaigners and taking the time to explore the nature of their concerns and to listen to their proposals to enhance the service. Those proposals go way beyond simply retaining the current base in Carnarvon. They have some real proposals to enhance the service. And I think that both the chair and the chief executive found the depth of knowledge and understanding of the service to be quite extraordinary, and useful things to be gained by that engagement. And then finally, Plice and the campaigners recognise that this is an opportunity to fulfil unmet need, but it's not equitable to meet that unmet need in other areas of North and Mid Wales by creating new unmet need in areas currently well served by the air ambulance. Thank you.
Many thanks, Jeff, for that summary. That was very useful. And just something to emphasise is that there has been an underlining of the fact that any change, any proposal must not lead to a worsening or lessening of the service that is currently provided. So that's a useful guideline also. Okay, diolch yn iawn. Reit, erbyn diwedd ein sesiwn ni, mi fyddwn ni angen rhoi cyfeiriad I Carol mwyn iddi hi fynd am barn ni i'r pwyllgor ar y cyd nesaf ymhen rhyw wythnos bythefnos. Felly, trafodaeth, cwestiynau, a wedyn ar y diwedd na I ofyn I Carol grynhoi beth yw ein safbwynt ni mwyn mynychu'r cyfarfod yna. Felly, os ydych chi eisiau chwilio cwestiwn, codwch eich llaw electronic, os gwelwch yn dda. Ar hyn o bryd, does na neb eisiau holi unrhyw gwestiwn o gwbl mawr syndod. Ond mae Urtha wedi codi llaw. Wi yn gallu gweld, ie, codi llaw. Felly, Urtha gynta, diolch yn iawn.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Dyfed. So, Jeff, I was listening carefully to what you were saying in describing the engagement that's taken place already. And, you know, we've all of us discussed this before, so engagement is absolutely crucial, but engagement that has understanding and where we can see that, you know, people actually support and want to go forward and see the real benefit of the changes that might be proposed, then, you know, obviously you're telling us that that's not what's happened here. That's not your experience of the engagement so far. And I was interested to hear you talk about a task and finish group and more work on engagement. So is there a specific time scale, and do you know exactly what the remit of the task and finish group is?
So firstly, I would characterize, I'm going to generalize now, it's not every single case, but at the events I attended, conversations were typically, tell us what you're worried about and we'll tell you why you're wrong. And that's not the way you do, as you know, engagement. With regard to the task and finish group, that's not a Plice initiative, that's part of the EMERT's procedure. We would certainly welcome that. And because it's going to be happening, we really don't see the need to take any in-principle decisions about what's going to happen. We shouldn't be compromising the possibilities by deciding now before we've had the information that work will inevitably produce.
So, thank you for that. And I know that you're not EMERT, but I'm just wondering if you're aware of any timescale attached to that work?
September, I believe.
It should be concluded by September this year.
Right.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, that's helpful. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, diolch Jeff. Nesa, Caroline.
Iawn, diolch yn fawr iawn. Chi'n clywed fi'n iawn?
Ie, clywed yn glir.
Iawn. Dwi'n siarad Saesneg, oherwydd mae gymaint o'r terminoleg yn y pecynna sydd gyda ni yn Saesneg. I do accept, you know, my starting base for all of this is to, you know, bear in mind the nature of the operating model It's, this service is focusing very much on pre-hospital critical care services by a clinically led service. So it's an important part of the service, but it complements and is different from the service provided by the ambulance services in Wales. I accept the need. There's clear need for change and improvement here, and that is shown clearly in the papers. And I'm in particular, I've been focusing on in our pack today from pages 228 to 235. It's clear that North Wales could be much better served by the service. There's clear lack of coverage at night, and that is something that needs to be addressed. So we've got a lack of utilisation of the service at the moment, and we have unmet need, which is clearly demonstrated as well. But the question I've got, and maybe it's a question for Carol really, recommendation 4 is very, very important. If there's going to be a change in the air coverage, then the road coverage really does need to be able to reach key remote and rural areas within the timescale specified. And I'm not clear how, I know the geography of rural Wales, North Wales and Mid Wales very well. The proposal is for 2 road-based centres, but I just can't see how 2 would be sufficient to meet the deeply rural and remote areas in Anglesey, Gwynedd, Powys and Ceredigion in particular. So I would certainly want to have quite detailed work and assurance on recommendation 4 before I could really support recommendation 1. So maybe it's not something that Carol is able to give us assurance on today. That is something for the task and finish group that's going to be taking place over the next 6 months. But I would want to see the detail of that and assurance that that could provide good coverage before I would be willing to support recommendation 1. Diolch.
Diolch iawn, Caroline. Na i ddod â Carol i mewn, falle i mateb yna cyn wedyn dod â Dyfed a Gareth i mewn. Achos mae'r pwynt yna yn eitha sylfaenol yn dydi. A falle hefyd y pwynt o y gallu gan hofrenyddion i hedfan yn y nos a sut bydde datblygu gwasanaeth felly heb o reidrwydd ganoli gwasanaeth, ond falle nid Carol di'r person i ateb yna, ond rhywun yn y gwasanaeth ei hun. Ond Carol.
Well, I'll have a go at most of that, David. So diolch. Just before I get to the recommendation 4, I think, Caroline, you make the really central point here, which is change is needed. And that unmet need is simply too high and not something that we can or should sort of tolerate, really. It's quite a strong word, doesn't it, tolerate? But we should be striving, as we were when we established this service in Wales, to meet the needs of more and more people. And that's been clearly demonstrated that there is opportunity to meet those needs. So I think that's the sort of central guiding principle. And yes, we're trying to square off this lack of utilisation, yet unmet need, and that's those are the issues. On recommendation 4 itself, I personally have been pushing quite hard to get more detail on recommendation 4 so that we can properly assess where that takes us. The unmet need that the proposal seeks to address is in the region of, I think, 14%, but we don't yet have, the detail that is in recommendation 4. And Jeff was saying about the task and finish group, and it feels difficult for me to be able to say, well, what would that do? But on the basis of it, as it stands now, I've worked in rural area for the last 15 plus years, and know the road networks, Caroline, you better than I. But you know, 2 cars in a highly rural area does feel you know, a drop in the ocean, really, and therefore that drives people to think about whether there's a different configuration, different level of usage of the car, maybe in more urban areas, etc. So those are the comments that I have heard over the last few weeks and months about, well, there is perhaps a place for road, but in your most rural areas, and that's the question mark. Helicopters flying at night, David. I'm not an expert, but I do believe it's about the type of helicopter that there is, and of course, I feel a bit. Common sense would say, you know, that you know, there's. You know, would the weather be so much different in different places? So that would be a question in my own mind. So I'll perhaps stop there and listen to some further comments.
Yeah, but just on the night flying, which seems to be quite a key point in the proposals, it does seem that it is possible to have night flying, not just in a base like Rhuddlan, but it is possible in Dinas Dinlle, Caernarfon and Welshpool. I should know because I hear them go across rescuing people from the mountains very frequently on another service. So, but that's the sort of information would be helpful to outline why we can, why we can't, and what the best options are, an options appraisal, which we don't have before us. Dyfed nesa, a wedyn Gareth, diolch.
Diolch, Dyfed. Wrth gwrs mae hwn yn rhywbeth sy'n, fel da ni wedi clywed yn barod, yn achosi pryder i lot o bobl ar draws yn ardal ni. Wedyn mae'n bwysig iawn, fel da ni wedi trafod yn barod, bod ni'n rhoi y dyledus amser ac yn ei gysidro fo'n iawn. Mi ges i aelod o'r tîm yng Nghaernarfon, mae hwn yn barafeddig yn cysylltu hefo fi yn ddiweddar iawn ar y mater yma. Ac yn bryderus ddim am gau, ond am yr angen am newid i'r gwasanaeth. Fel rhywun sy'n gweithio yn efo bob dydd, mae oedd i adnabod bod yn segur am gyfnodau, dwi'n meddwl 140 diwrnod mewn blwyddyn yn cael effaith ar y tîm. Mae yna broblemau eraill yn codi o ran hynny hefyd. A dwi'n meddwl bod yr achos ar gyfer newid a gwella wedi wneud ac yn un cry, a dwi'n falch bod o wedi cysylltu hefo fi a rhannu hynny hefyd. Fel ddwedodd Carol yn gynharach, mae yna safbwyntiau gwahanol o fewn y gwasanaeth hefyd, a mae'n bwysig cysidro heini hefyd. Ond wrth ofyn cwestiwn, a wedi darllen y papurau, wrth gwrs, drosodd, a dod yn ymwybodol o bethau do'n i ddim yn ymwybodol ohono fo cynt. Ac wrth sôn am yr angen am newid, ydy beth sy'n cael ei olw'n Saesneg, wrth gwrs, yn met need, sef mae yna ardaloedd lle dydyn ni ddim yn mynd i gael y gwasanaeth yn oriau'r hwyr, wedi'r hwyr gyda'r nos. A mae rhaid i hynny newid. Felly, os yn achos am newid oes, ydw i wedi fy mherswadio na beth sy'n cael ei roi o'n blaenau ni wan ydy'r y gorau fedrwn ni gael, ac i mi ar hyn o bryd, na ydy'r ateb i hynny. Dwi ddim yn meddwl, this is not as good as it gets, dwi'n meddwl ydy be mae'r cynnig newydd yma yn ei roed. A hefyd, dwi'n meddwl, fel sydd wedi cael ei ategu ynghynt, mae yna falle rhai pryderon gynnu am y broses, a hefyd pa mor agored neu mae'r broses yma wedi bod hefo pobl o ran y cynnig hefyd. Dwi'n meddwl falle bod ni wedi colli chydig o'r neges, di o ddim wedi cael ei gyfathrebu'n effeithiol iawn falle, ond Ia, ond dwi'n cael trafferth cefnogi y cynnig yma fel mae o'n ei ffurf bresennol. Diolch.
Diolch yn iawn. Gareth, ti nesa?
Thank you. Well, I got one question and then a sort of view. So the question really is to Carol, because from what Clive have said seems to me in principle reasonable, i.e. that we should use the time between now and September not only to do the work on the complementary elements in recommendation 4, which is clearly not particularly well thought, not well explained anyway, before sort of taking a final decision on this. So I would want to know whether there is any strong reason why that, I mean, I'm not generally in favour of putting these off, but why there's any strong reason why that is an unreasonable course of action. But having said that, if we really are faced with making a decision now about whether to implement this change or not to implement this change, which is effectively saying, well, let's go back to the drawing board, I have to say, I think it's clear cut to me that we should go for this change. Why do I say that? Well, at the moment, 75% of the population of North Wales has no coverage after 8 o'clock at night from the air ambulance service that can arrive in less than 60 minutes. It's the only part of Wales that's true. 17% of the population of Wales can't be reached by air ambulance at night, and all of that is in North Wales, 500,000 people. Betsy has 33% of the unmet needs. I mean, I'm just drawing this, I knew nothing about this, let me say, until I read the papers. So I'm just going on an analysis of the information that's been given. Betsy has 3% of the unmet need, of which 85% of that unmet need in North Wales is at night. So the change that is proposed would mean that we would get that coverage till 2 a.m. in the morning, and bearing in mind a lot of fatalities, particularly on the roads, take place in the early hours of the morning. So you would get that 500,000 people, 3/4 of the population that we serve, would at least have the option of a viable night service, which they don't currently have. So what would be lost from this proposal? And let me be clear, I'm not saying that there is, in an ideal world, not a better version. There may even be a better version with the same resource, although I suspect that's probably less likely. But so what will we lose? Well, I worry that there is, where the loss will be is in what happens when the helicopters don't fly and response is made by road. I think it's wrong to be too fixated on that. If you look at the figures for both Welshpool and Carnarvon, in Carnarvon it's only 17% of the time that road is used, and in Welshpool it's 22%. And it's interesting, Carol, you said, well, maybe the road should be used more in urban areas. Well, that's exactly what happens. My sister-in-law's mother had a heart attack in the home in the Gower. There was no reason a helicopter couldn't have flown, but it was quicker for the service from Davern to go to their house in the Gower and pick her up and take her to hospital. So, you know, the reason the carriers are not used more in North Wales is not, I suspect, down to weather. That probably is, when it is used, is not used, the helicopter's not used, it's because of the weather. But, you know, it's a mix and match service. So what we will lose is that in some parts of our population will not be able to be reached so quickly by road. And actually, it's not just in the west, I suspect. I haven't seen a map of this. It will be in the far west, and it will be in the far south areas like Llangollen, I suspect, because they would be reached more easily from Wrexham than Rhuddlan. Against that, some areas in the daytime will be reached more quickly by road. So I think it's a zero-sum game on the road, but I think that is completely then dwarfed by the fact that what will not change is 100% of the population in our area will have service by helicopter in the day, because at the moment 100% of the whole of Wales can be served within 30 minutes by helicopter. And at night, from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m., where currently there is no helicopter service that is less than 60 minutes, we will have the whole of North Wales covered with a helicopter service within 60 minutes. And that is a significant change. So I'm aware, I think I'm in a minority on this board for saying if we have to make a decision now, I would support what made the offer. I know that may not be popular. I think it's actually right. But I would say, going back to my first point, that if it is true that the making a decision at the end of September compared to making a decision now will make no difference in terms of the viability of then bringing forward the change in the same sort of timescale, then I would support Lys's view that we should wait until we've got more detail on the recommendation for.
Diolch yn fawr, Gareth. Mi fydd Carol dod yn ôl ar hynny mewn chydig, ond i ddod â mic mewn rwan a wedyn Yrtha. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr, Mr. Cadeirydd. I spent the day at Carnarvon Airport yesterday, and I was assured that certainly night flying from Carnarvon is not a problem. It's more about shifts, more about hours, and it's about aircraft. So there isn't a problem really as such to have night flying out of it. Let's have that very clear. The unmet need, of course, which we've heard such a lot about, can actually be met by one extra mission per base throughout Wales, as it stands. So, as I say, once you put in the increased capability of night flying, it blows that out of the water again. So, and I agree with Caroline as regards the enhanced land service suggested by someone that's probably never driven to Anelog or Llanfair yng Nghonwy or Llanuwchllyn. So what I do not want is that people who are now serviced by the air ambulance are further disadvantaged. The fact is that the further northeast that you travel, you're safer. You're statistically safer. You have the luxury of being nearer to clusters of large hospitals, much better road networks, better travelling times, better centres of excellence with specialist clinicians, and even closer to major trauma centres. If a logic dictates that the further north, south, or west you go, the further you are from any kind of urgent care, which is at the centre of this matter. The relocation of the police helicopter to Rhuddlan is a good example. When it moved, they spent 50% of their time in Manchester and on the Wirral, which is unacceptable. Now, regarding the ESAC consultation, I think it should, I've asked that it be demonstrated that the consultation has set aside the view of the EMERT service. Particularly, and my rationale for this is because the director who demonstrated via YouTube a predetermined view of what the outcome should be by his advocated closure of 2 bases. Despite requesting it from Mr. Harry on no less than 3 occasions, I've not had evidence or assurances that the EMERT's view has been discarded. In the EMERT's director's podcast, which was broadcast in November but taken down in December, he said, "We recognise the change in the location of our bases and our working hours will provide concerns for local communities."
Mike, I just torri ar draws am funud, Mike, mae'n rwy'n iawn ni, ond just i nodi bod neb yma i mateb i'r hyn wyt ti wedi deud. Dwi'n derbyn hyn ti wedi deud, ond mi fydde fo'n anheg i mi beidio deud, wel, honiadau ydi rheini, a does neb yma i mateb iddyn nhw wedyn. Peth gorau ydi symud ymlaen, mae gyfer rhagor o sylwadau os allti ysgrifennu dda. Diolch.
Okay, thank you for that, Chair. I can provide a copy of the YouTube broadcast for anybody who wants to see it. So, and as regards the, the road travel, we're predominantly in our area sphere of influence in the board, a rural area, and at the end of the day, what we should not be doing is making people worse off, and it's certainly my view that these proposals, that's what will happen, and I'm very keen on what Jeff suggested, that's the route we should be going. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr, Mike, Bertha, a wedyn Chris, a wedyn dwi'n mynd I droi at Carol wedyn. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Dyfed. It's really interesting to hear people speak. We've all got different opinions, but also people are bringing in different facts that they've gleaned from reading the papers, but other facts they knew from perhaps, other information they've gained. And that makes me more aware of how important it is that the engagement process is open in the fullest sense of the word, and that the information we share is really clear and understandable about, the reasons this has come, these suggestions have come about. The analyses, I have read the papers. There are a lot of different analyses in there, and it's quite hard to get some of them to sit next to each other to make sense. So some really strong, clear digest of all of the information that we have pulled together, I think that is really, really important, so that everybody understands what we're basing our decisions on. And I also hear what Jeff has said, and really support Gareth in that, if waiting 6 months for September is not going to have a huge impact, a detrimental impact on anybody or any part of the service, then, why don't we wait and see? There's been different questions raised here. So there's been a big thing about unmet need, 14%. Can that be raised? There's been questions about the road bases and different usage of cars. So there's questions there that people haven't seen answers to. Carol has said she wanted to see more detail on recommendation 4. And there's been big questions around what is the issue about night flying? Is it the helicopters? Is it lack of staff? There seems to me that there's quite a lot of questions that we don't really have the answers to yet. And there's every chance that the Task and Finish group, although I'm not completely certain as I kind of sit in front of you now what their remit is, but there's every chance that they may bring more knowledge and more light onto those questions that have been raised. So I see a lot of sense in the proposal, really, to kind of wait to get more information. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Arthur. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, observations, I think, more than anything from my perspective. I think I echo the feeling of several of the other members in respect of the detail of recommendation 4. And I do struggle quite a lot on whether or not we are in a position to make a properly informed decision at this juncture. And I do wonder, unless there is something which makes it somewhat unworkable to push the decision back to December, would be the most sensible thing to do. Because to not do so would, leaves us making a decision on effectively an unknown quantity. But I think, and I think I stand behind Gareth on this, I think if I were pushed to make a decision, I think we balance in our minds 2 parallel and perhaps competing objectives or viewpoints. The first is the decision as a board and with the benefits and well-being of those that we serve in mind in North Wales, and I suppose more widely the benefits of this service. And I think taking the former, I think the unmet need is simply unacceptable, and the recommendations that they stand do appear to allay that somewhat. And I think as a health board, if you take it on that very binary standpoint and say, well, this is what's best for those of us, for the majority in North Wales, I think we have to stand behind those recommendations. I think if you took a step back and look at it more broadly in terms of the service offering, I can see the concerns, and I think that my support perhaps wanes slightly, but doesn't tip over the precipice of not supporting change at all. I suppose the only final point and observation I'd have, and I must admit I'm not an expert in this area, so I might well be wrong, but my understanding of the objectives of the service is not one to replace the usual emergency ambulances. It's simply to provide a complementary service. And I do wonder, and with the utmost respect to those that we've heard speak today and those that have contributed to the consultations. I wonder if perhaps some of the concerns are conflating two quite different points. One is a degradation in a service which is not meant to replace the fact that there is a population that lives in a more rural part of Wales, and that's a service that should be met by a traditional offering anyway, and the fact that we just have an unacceptable unmet need. And I wonder if we are conflating at some point, but if we were pushed today, I think we have to support based on the basis of the unmet need, but if we could push off to September, I think that would be preferable.
Diolch yn iawn. Chris, Carol, dwi'n troi at chi mewn munud, so I'll ask you, Carol, in a minute, just to sort of confirm what all the narrative we can ask you to take with you, as it were, to that joint committee meeting. I think, just trying to summarise, we've got different views from the board. Many have expressed that they can see there's a need for change, but also perhaps an opportunity to develop the service. And that, whilst that change is clear, what isn't clear is what it's going to look like specifically, and how it's going to address the issues that have been raised, particularly in the northwest of our region, so the service can still provide for that population. And there's something about one of the great things the service does is to reach very remote areas, and we're not quite sure then how any different service would still be able to meet that demand without a lessening of the service. And I think that's the phrase, or worsening of the service, that EMIRTs use themselves. So it seems that task and finish group, which is a bit late in the day, but and one would have welcomed had that work happened some months ago and fed into the reports that's before us. But is it possibly the view, I think, of the board that more work needs to be done to explore different avenues, different options, and to develop those alongside recommendation 4, and for us to have more detail at the same time? I think that seems to be the position of the board, if there is an opportunity to do that. Perhaps I can ask you to summarise, Carol, and just underline what that view would be taking into the joint committee. Diolch yn iawn.
Well, wow, and thanks very much, David, and thanks all, because I do, as I go to that committee, feel a weight of responsibility as we go in. David, very, very happy to summarise. I just wonder if I might just address a couple of the points first of all that were, sure. Because I think this is and Chris in his final comments there was talking about the tension in this matter. So I just wanted to draw a few things. David Jones was talking about the strong case for change, and I think I've heard that, and that is clear. I don't think any of us would accept that the sort of the status quo in terms of the level of unmet need of people in our communities across North Wales is something that can stay the same. That's going to have to change, and I think Gareth explained the numbers really well to us. So this is an important issue for a lot of people, and it's particularly about then, well, how does that unmet need get reduced? It's the how, to the cases there to make changes. And I guess then David also said about, well, is this proposal the best we can have? Is it? And I think, you know, there's still a question there coming from us in terms of, well, we don't have recommendation for detail in terms of what that contributes, but really, is this the best that we can do? And then Gareth's view and you know, Chris came in as well. Well, if it's this change or nothing, isn't this change the one that we have to go for? So there's sort of those three categories for me about, well, no one wants no change. Everyone wants an improvement. Is this all that we've got? Is this the, you know, Hobson's choice, if you like? Is this it? I think then what came through really strongly in that really is about insufficient information about the road service that would give us anything upon which we could really base a judgment about the benefits of that, or even, you know, some of the disbenefits of that would be perceived by the highly rural communities. And Gareth's absolutely right in terms of, for some areas of our patch, the utilisation of a road vehicle will add benefit and already adds benefit. Is there more that can be achieved? But in some areas, it will perhaps have far less impact, and that is a problem. And then the overarching sort of message that I've taken out is, what's the rush? Why, you know, why are we being asked to get to a decision point through JCC now, rather than having all of that work available to us? What I am aware is that there has been representation from the Wales Air Ambulance charity, expressing some, you know, very real and genuine concern that this has been rolling on for some time, and wanting some certainty. So I think that is probably pushing things along a little. But that said, you know, this change is not down for activation until 2026 at the earliest, says Jeff, you know, and that corroborates with mine. So there is a window to really look again hard at, is this the best that we can do? And you know, I think I'm taking that message through. And in particular, we want to retain the confidence of those people that live in rural areas, in the services that are provided. And this is about access to high acuity care. And proximity to high acuity care is the big factor here, I think. So David, I'm not quite sure if I have responded to all of those, but in conclusion, I think what we're saying is change is needed. We want to see that unmet need significantly eaten into. I want more than 14%, significantly more for the population. We want to see it done in a way that maximizes the unmet need and retains confidence in the service. So I think that's where we are. I haven't given a comment on the process. I know there were comments on the process. Heard from Jeff on that. So I think we are at this stage probably noting that those concerns exist. And
we would support the work of the Task and Finish group to give more evidence to support any change or recommendation. Right. Da iawn, Carol, diolch yn iawn. Ydy hynny yn crynhoi yn safbwynt yn gyffredinol? Ydyn ni'n hapus i Carol fynd a mynegu'r farn honno i'r pwyllgor ar y cyd mewn rhyw bythefnos? Felly, yn safbwynt ni, fel mae Carol wedi amlinellu, yn gofyn am ragor o waith mwyn ymateb i'r pryderon sydd wedi cael ei mynegu. Dwi'n meddwl bod hynny yn bwysig iawn i ni nodi fel bwrdd, oherwydd dyn ni'n deall beth yw newid yn dydyn fel bwr iechyd, fel gwasanaeth iechyd. Dyn ni'n gorfod newid y ffordd dyn ni'n cynnal gwasanaethau fel pawb arall. Ond gyda newid o math yma, mae angen ceisio cael tystiolaeth ac angen edrych ar yr opsiwn gorau posib. Beth yw'r opsiwn gorau posib? A dwi ddim yn meddwl bod ni wedi cael ein darbwyllo a hynny hyd yma, ond mae'n gyfle i wneud yna gobeithio dros y misoedd nesaf. Pam yn hapus efo hynny? Rwy'n eisiau deud yn wahanol. Os nad oes, gai ddiolch yn fawr iawn i bawb am y drafodaeth, gai ddiolch i Jeff o llais yn arbennig am fynychu cyfarfod ni heddiw, ni'n gwerthfawrogi'r cyfraniad Jeff. Diolch i bawb sydd wedi bod yn paratoi ar gyfer heddiw, lot fawr o waith, cyfarfod arbennig o'r bwr, lot o waith, darllen lot o bapurau a lot o baratoi. Felly diolch o galon i chi gyd sydd wedi bod yn clwm a hynny. Diolch i Lowri sydd wedi bod yn gwneud y gwasanaeth cyfieithu yn ogystal. Felly dyna ddiwedd ein cyfarfod ni, a mae'n cyfarfod nesaf ni ym mis Mai, diwedd mis Mai, dwi'n credu fod o rhywbeth fel 30 o Fai, dweud y gwir. Felly yn Llandudno, yn Fenyw Cymru, byddwn ni'n cynnal cyfarfod nesaf Mai 14. Diolch i chi os ydych chi wedi bod yn gwylio, ac fel pob amser, dyn ni'n croesawu unrhyw adborth os ydych chi eisiau cysylltu efo ni, mae'n y gyfle i chi wneud hynny, dwi'n siŵr.